Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Morphy Auction Company, taking a look at one of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming April of 2019 premiere auction. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 3566, which is actually kind of one of the less confusingly named of their guns because it is chambered for the 356 TSW cartridge. And really, the story that I want to go over today is one of the cartridge and the political infighting between USPSA, which is the U.S. Formal governing body for IPSC, International Practical Shooting Confederation, and the Smith & Wesson Company. So, USPSA, or IPSC, is basically an action pistol style of competition where you shoot stuff really fast on the move. It's pretty cool. It has attracted today, and even 20 years ago, had attracted a lot of very good competitive shooters, a lot of sponsors. There was getting to be significant money for people in these matches in terms of maybe not prizes so much, but sponsorship. And there was a big drive to get better, to develop better gear. And one of the interesting elements of IPSC is that it had two different divisions for power factor. They figured if you're shooting a heavy cartridge, that's obviously going to have more recoil and less capacity, and so you should be compensated for that by getting more points for your hits than people who are shooting smaller cartridges, which would be minor category. And so what they did is they came up with a system where you had a power factor, which is bullet weight times velocity. And you had to have a certain power factor to be in major category, and everything less than that was in minor. And basically, the way this was envisioned was 9mm Parabellum is minor, 45 ACP is major. Those are the two main calibers. And what people discovered is if we take 38 Super and we load it a little hot, we can actually get enough velocity out of it to qualify as major category. And about this time, optics and muzzle brakes started showing up on these pistols, and a muzzle brake will work better with high pressure ammunition because there's more gas coming out at higher velocity at the barrel to actually make the muzzle brake do its job. You know, if you're venting gas upward to counteract muzzle climb, the more gas you're venting upward, the more force you're putting downward on the muzzle. So it turned out that if you took 38 Super and you loaded it hotter and hotter, your muzzle brake was actually working better and better as you did that, making the gun more controllable. And you could get a couple extra rounds of 38 Super in a typical pistol compared to 45 Auto, a lot of these being like 1911 or 1911 clones. And not surprisingly, people took this idea and expanded on it. And the goal for a lot of people was to take 9x19, 9mm Parabellum, and load it hot enough that it would make major power factor. Because you could put a brake on the gun and you could get a lot more capacity over anything else in major without sacrificing all that much in terms of controllability because of your really good muzzle brake. And USPSA saw this, and part of the problem was this arms race of gear and cartridge. It was having two problematic effects. The first is it was driving some people away from the sport because all of a sudden, if you want to be competitive, now you've got to invest in, you know, all sorts of fancier, more expensive gear. And there were a lot of people who just wanted to shoot, you know, the kind of standard stock guns that they already had. And in addition, some of this hand-loaded ammo was getting to the point of maybe being dangerous. Like maybe in your zeal to get to major power factor, you're creating cartridges that may do serious damage to a gun. And sooner or later, one of these guns may blow up on someone and actually cause injuries, and that would be really bad for the sport. So they did a couple things. They introduced a limited division, which was basically not fancy guns. So with the introduction of a limited division, now guns with optics and muzzle brakes were relegated to an open category, unless you could segregate your shooters between the people who wanted to have a gear race and the people who just wanted to have a competition race with limited, literally and figuratively, equipment. There were a couple other requirements. You were not allowed to use ammunition that was loaded hotter than SAMI spec. SAMI being the European organization that dictates ammunition manufacturing standards. So you couldn't take 9mm Parabellum and load it up super duper hot and shoot that. You also had to be a production class gun, or to be a limited class gun, it had to have a production of at least 1,000 units. So you couldn't just make up your own thing and use it in limited division. In open, that's fine, do whatever you want. For limited, it has to be a production gun. And if you're going to shoot a limited gun, and it's going to be a major power factor, you had to have, for that combination to be, or for that caliber to be accepted, you had to be able to show that there were 3 different ammunition companies commercially producing major power factor loadings of that ammunition on the commercial market. So the idea here was basically to try and push this back to the original. If it's 9mm, it's minor. If it's 45, it's major. Stop trying to game the system, guys. That kind of thing. Smith & Wesson took this opportunity to create what really could have been an excellent competition pistol. Well, it is an excellent competition pistol. It could have really dominated this market. There was nothing else out there that could have been, that would qualify for major caliber in the limited division. This would have been it. So what they did is they took their standard 3rd generation semi-auto pistol design, double stack. They built it up capable of handling the pressure of their new cartridge, which was, it'll fit in a standard 9mm magazine. The cartridge was the 356 TSW, that standing for Team Smith & Wesson, because this was going to be the gun that the formal official Smith & Wesson competition team was going to use. They got Federal to start making ammunition for it, as well as Corbon, and there was, I think, at least one other company. They needed 3 different manufacturers to market ammo that all met the major power factor. To make the actual cartridge, they started with the 9x21 IMI case. They lengthened it by 0.5 millimeter so that it wouldn't interchange with the standard 9x21, and they renamed it 356 TSW. So it's a longer case, which gives you more powder capacity, and it also means that the cartridge can be loaded to a higher pressure without danger that it could be accidentally fired in a gun chambered for something lower pressure like 9mm parabellum. Your standard magazine here would fit 15 of these cartridges, which was more than you could get with any other major power factor cartridge in the equivalent length of magazine. And then the gun they designed for it was tricked out from the factory for competition. Has a big magwell funnel here, has an excellent single action trigger. I mean, that's a really, really nice trigger. Factory adjustable sights. And a very smooth action. These were actually produced by the Smith & Wesson Performance Center, which did Smith's custom and semi-custom work, and they are really nice guns. So why didn't this go on to just dominate limited division USPSA? Well, in the summer of 1994, the USPSA Board of Directors had a vote. They had a meeting, and part of that meeting was a vote on whether or not to recognize this pistol with its ammunition as being legal as major caliber limited division legal. Smith & Wesson was at this point starting to ship guns. They were starting to advertise them because they met all the requirements. They had a SAMI spec on this ammunition that was perfectly within reason for the loadings that they were making. They had multiple manufacturers producing the ammo. They had made well more than 1,000 of the guns. By all rights, this was a shoo-in. However, in the summer of '94, the USPSA Board of Directors decided against authorizing this pistol. And then a few months later, in February of 1995, they came back and made an addendum to the rules stating that now, if you wanted to be major caliber limited, you also had a minimum bullet diameter of 0.400 inches. Basically flat outlawing anything that was a 9mm based cartridge. And that just clobbered this pistol. That was really the death knell for the cartridge, the 356 TSW, and these guns. Really, I think a lot of people will think unfair to Smith & Wesson, although to play devil's advocate here, the purpose of this pistol was basically to exploit a loophole in the rules. The purpose of the rules was to segregate 9mm guns from 45 caliber guns and to only be awarding extra points for hits, for major caliber hits, to guns that had a balancing downside, namely the heavier muzzle flip and less capacity. So trying to come up with a gun that would meet that would be the best of both worlds really was not the spirit of USPSA's intended rules. So that's kind of what comes when winning at competition becomes more important than, say, self-improvement through competition. But it certainly leaves us with a very interesting relic of a pistol. As a result of all of these various shenanigans and this political infighting between Smith & Wesson and USPSA, the real loser here was the 356 TSW cartridge. It had the potential to be something really quite appealing. It had the potential to have a real impact on the market. For example, this is very similar in concept to the 357 SIG, which is a cartridge designed to push a 9mm bullet at a much higher velocity than standard 9mm parabellum can. 357 SIG does this by having a necked down case so that it has more powder volume behind the bullet. It's basically a 40 Smith & Wesson sized case necked down to a 9mm or 38 caliber bullet. The downside to 357 SIG is that because it is that larger diameter case, it has less magazine capacity than the 9mm based cartridges. So in theory, 356 TSW and 357 SIG accomplish the same thing, except the 356 does it with the additional full magazine capacity of a 9mm type cartridge. It should have been the winner in the market. Now, today 357 SIG has more or less just gone away, and maybe 356 would have as well, but having this gun primarily marketed as an IPSC competition gun that you could shoot major power factor in limited division with, that's what Smith & Wesson really staked this gun on, and when that rug got pulled out from under them, it kind of left the pistol high and dry. They weren't in production very long. They've ended up being quite rare and unusual guns. The ammunition, of course, is no longer produced, and now the ammunition is rare. The one saving grace for a lot of the people with these guns is that Smith & Wesson did actually have they were able to make barrels for these in 9mm parabellum, 9x19. So a lot of the owners of these guns have gotten new barrels for them from Smith & Wesson, and they can shoot standard 9mm ammunition, which means that you're not dependent on making or finding that 357 or 356 TSW ammo anymore. Anyway, I thought this is a pretty interesting little side story about some of the weird hijinks that go on kind of behind the scenes in the shooting industry, the gun industry, the shooting sports arena. So this, by the way, is a magnificent example of a 357 or of a 3566. Smith & Wesson's naming conventions are always a bit of a hassle. Anyway, it's a gorgeous example of the gun. It's actually being sold here with, I believe, 600 rounds of the original ammo. So if you're interested in both a gun that's a cool piece of modern firearms history and also a fantastic gun just on its own merits, well, this might be your chance to get one. If you click the link in the description text below, you will find yourself at forgottenweapons.com, and from there you can click over to Morphy's catalog page for this pistol. You can take a look at their pictures, their description, their price estimate, all that sort of stuff. You can place a bid for it right there on their website, or just browse through the other guns they have in the auction. Thanks for watching.